The courtroom smelled like old wood and stale coffee, the kind of scent that clings to your clothes long after you leave. Lucia Romano sat in the interpreter's booth, her fingers tapping nervously against the armrest as she waited for the session to begin. She'd been doing this job for 3 years now, translating for defendants who barely looked at her, for lawyers who spoke too fast, for judges who expected perfection every single time. But today felt different. Today, the air itself seemed heavier, charged with something she couldn't quite name. When Adrian Costa walked into the courtroom, every head turned. He moved with the kind of confidence that didn't need announcement, didn't need validation. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Lucia's monthly rent, he looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine spread about dangerous elegance. His dark hair was slicked back perfectly, not a strand out of place, and even from her booth, Lucia could see the glint of an expensive watch on his wrist. He unbuttoned his suit jacket as he sat down, revealing a crisp white shirt with the top button undone, and she caught a glimpse of ink on his neck, dark lines that disappeared beneath the collar, hinting at stories written on skin. Adrian Costa. She'd heard the name whispered in hallways, seen it printed in newspapers with words like alleged and suspected, dancing around it like careful moths. The man who supposedly brought silence to Manhattan's underworld, who made problems disappear with a phone call, who walked the line between legitimate business and something far darker with the grace of a tightrope artist. The proceedings began, and Lucia slipped into her role, translating the judge's words into Italian, then the defense attorney's questions, then the prosecutor's objections. It was mechanical, familiar, safe. But every time she glanced at Adrian, she found him watching her instead of the lawyers. Not in the way men usually watched her, not with hunger or curiosity, but with something more unsettling. Recognition. As if he knew something about her that she didn't know herself. Hours passed. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, giving everyone a sickly pallor except Adrian, who somehow looked like he belonged in better lighting, better circumstances. Lucia's throat grew dry from speaking. Her back ached from sitting. And the weight of the security guard's stares, Adrian's men, clearly, pressed against her shoulders like physical things. Then it happened. During a brief recess, as the lawyers shuffled papers and the judge stepped away, Lucia let her guard down for just a moment. She was exhausted, frustrated by the legal theatrics, angry at the way Adrian's presence commanded the entire room while he barely spoke. And in that moment of weakness, she muttered under her breath in Sicilian, the language of her father, the language of her childhood, the language she thought nobody here would understand. Bastardo viziato. Spoiled bastard. The words were barely audible. A whisper meant only for herself, a tiny rebellion against the suffocating atmosphere. But the room, which had been filled with quiet conversation, suddenly went silent. Lucia's heart stopped. She looked up and found Adrian staring directly at her, his dark eyes sharp and focused, a slow smile spreading across his face that was somehow more terrifying than any scowl. He leaned back in his chair, crossing one leg over the other, and spoke for the first time since entering the courtroom, his voice low and smooth, carrying easily across the space between them. "Say that again, princess." The way he said it, princess, made it sound like both an endearment and a challenge, dripping with amusement and something darker. Lucia felt heat rush to her cheeks, a mixture of embarrassment and fury. She opened her mouth to deny it, to pretend she'd said something else, anything else, but the words stuck in her throat. Because he knew. He understood Sicilian. He'd heard her perfectly. The judge returned, calling the session back to order, but Lucia could barely focus. Her hands trembled as she translated, her voice slightly unsteady. She could feel Adrian's gaze on her like a physical touch, could sense his satisfaction at having rattled her. When the session finally ended, she gathered her things quickly, desperate to escape. but as she rushed toward the exit, she heard his voice again, closer this time. Leaving so soon? Adrian stood in the hallway, his security detail a few steps behind, giving them the illusion of privacy. I was hoping we could continue our conversation. We weren't having a conversation, Lucia said, forcing herself to meet his eyes, to not show fear. And I don't know what you think you heard. But you called me a spoiled bastard, he interrupted, still smiling. In Sicilian. Which is interesting, because most people in this building barely speak proper English, let alone a dialect from a small village probably not far from where my grandmother was born. Lucia's jaw tightened. If you understood me, then you know it was a private comment. Nothing is private in a courtroom, Miss Romano. He stepped closer, and she caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with something earthier, like rain and leather. Besides, I appreciated the honesty. Most people who work for the justice system spend their days lying. You, at least, said what you really thought. I don't work for you, she said sharply. Not yet, Adrian replied, and something in his tone made her stomach flip. But that's about to change. Before she could ask what he meant, he turned and walked away, his men following like shadows. Lucia stood in the empty hallway, her heart pounding, wondering what she'd just gotten herself into. She told herself it was nothing, that he was just another defendant trying to intimidate a court employee, that by tomorrow this would be forgotten. She was wrong on all counts. The next morning, Lucia arrived at the courthouse to find her supervisor, waiting with a tight expression and a folder in his hands. You've been reassigned, he said without preamble, handing her the folder, effective immediately. Reassigned? To what? Private interpreter services, for a confidential judicial agreement. The client specifically requested you. Lucia didn't need to open the folder to know whose name would be inside. She did anyway, her eyes scanning the official letterhead until they landed on the signature at the bottom. Adrian Costa. This is ridiculous, she said, her voice rising. He can't just request me like I'm some sort of... The request came through proper channels, her supervisor interrupted. And before you argue, let me be clear. This isn't optional. The agreement involves federal cooperation, witness protection coordination, and highly sensitive information. You're one of the few certified interpreters with the security clearance and language skills required. Plus, he added, his expression softening slightly, the pay is triple your current rate. Lucia wanted to refuse. Every instinct told her to walk away, to not get involved with a man like Adrian Costa, with his dangerous eyes and his knowing smile and his world of shadows. But she thought about her father's mounting medical bills, about the leaky roof in her apartment building that the landlord refused to fix, about the student loans that never seemed to shrink no matter how much she paid. When do I start? She heard herself say. Today, 2:00, address is in the folder. Her supervisor paused, then added quietly, Be careful, Lucia. These aren't the kind of people who forget insults. As Lucia sat in her car outside the address, a nondescript office building in Midtown, she realized that her entire life had just shifted off its axis, all because of 3 words muttered in a language she thought was safe, all because a man with ink on his skin and danger in his smile had heard her and decided she was interesting enough to keep close. She checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, straightened her blazer, and whispered to herself in Sicilian, a prayer her grandmother used to say, Dio, aiutami. God, help me. Then she stepped out of the car and walked toward whatever came next. The office was nothing like Lucia expected. She'd imagined something dark and intimidating, perhaps filled with cigar smoke and leather furniture, the cliché headquarters of a man with Adrian Costa's reputation. Instead, she found herself in a bright, modern conference room, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, minimalist furniture, and abstract art on the walls that probably cost more than her car. It was the kind of space that screamed legitimate business. The kind of place where deals were signed and futures were traded, where nothing illegal could possibly happen, which of course made her more nervous. Adrian was already there when she arrived, sitting at the head of a long glass table, reviewing documents with two lawyers who looked exhausted despite the early hour. He glanced up when she entered, and that same smile from yesterday curved his lips, like he'd been waiting specifically for this moment. "Miss Romano?" he said, standing with an old-world courtesy that seemed at odds with everything she knew about him. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit." Lucia took the chair furthest from him, setting down her bag and pulling out her notebook and recording device. Professional. She could be professional. "I was told this involves a confidential judicial agreement. What exactly will I be translating?" "Straight to business. I like that." Adrian dismissed the lawyers with a subtle nod, and they gathered their things quickly, leaving them alone. Once the door closed, his demeanor shifted slightly. Still composed, but less formal, more real. "The federal prosecutors and I have reached an understanding. I provide information about certain operations in exchange for immunity and protection for specific individuals." "Witness protection?" Lucia said, understanding clicking into place. "You're turning informant." "I'm restructuring my priorities," Adrian corrected, his tone sharp for the first time. "And I need someone who can translate documents, conversations, and testimony that will be used in multiple federal cases. Someone discreet. Someone who understands not just Italian and Sicilian, but the nuances, the cultural context, the way people say one thing and mean another." Lucia studied him carefully. "Why me specifically? There are dozens of interpreters with those qualifications." Adrian leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming a slow rhythm on the armrest. "Because you called me a spoiled bastard in a language you thought I wouldn't understand, which means you're honest, even when you think no one's listening. That's rare. That's valuable." He paused, his dark eyes holding hers. "And because you're scared of me, but you're here anyway, which means you're brave. I need someone brave." The compliment, if it could be called that, unsettled her more than any threat. Lucia looked away, focusing on her notebook. "When do we start?" "Now." For the next 4 hours, Lucia translated documents that told stories she wished she didn't understand, financial records that traced money through shell companies and offshore accounts, transcripts of conversations recorded without the speaker's knowledge, words that implicated powerful people in crimes ranging from extortion to murder, witness statements from people whose names had been redacted, their voices shaking even in written form as they described things no one should have to see. And through it all, Adrian watched her, occasionally asking questions, clarifying context, explaining connections she wouldn't have understood otherwise. He was sharp, frighteningly so, catching discrepancies she'd missed, pointing out when translations needed more cultural nuance, correcting her pronunciation of certain Sicilian phrases with a patience that surprised her. "You learned dialect from your family?" he said during a break, not a question but a statement. "Northern Sicily, near Palermo maybe." Lucia tensed. "How did you—" "Your vowels, the way you soften certain consonants. My grandmother spoke the same way." Adrian stood, walking to the window, his hands in his pockets. "She used to say that Sicilian wasn't just a language. It was a way of keeping secrets in plain sight. You say one thing, but the real meaning is underneath, between the words." "Is that what you're doing now?" Lucia asked before she could stop herself. "Saying one thing while meaning another?" He turned to face her, and for a moment, his expression was unguarded, almost vulnerable. "I'm trying to do something I should have done years ago. I'm trying to protect people who can't protect themselves. The federal agreement isn't about saving my own skin. I could disappear tomorrow and they'd never find me. It's about getting others out. People who were born into this life and never had a choice. Lucia wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe that there was something redeemable in this man, that he wasn't just another criminal using the system to his advantage. But she'd spent 3 years in courtrooms, listening to defendants spin stories, watching guilty men walk free because they knew how to manipulate emotion. "Why should I trust anything you say?" she asked quietly. Adrian crossed the room until he stood on the other side of the table, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. Close enough to notice that the ink on his neck wasn't random. It was text, written in Italian, though she couldn't make out the words. "You shouldn't," he said simply. "Trust should be earned, so let me earn it." He slid a folder across the table. Lucia opened it cautiously and found photographs. Children's faces, maybe a dozen of them, ranging in age from infants to teenagers. "Who are these?" "Sons and daughters of men in my organization. Some are legitimate children, some are from affairs, from second families, from mistakes. All of them are at risk because of their father's choices." Adrian's jaw tightened. "The federal agreement includes relocation and new identities for these kids and their mothers. Clean breaks, clean futures. That's what I'm buying with my cooperation." Lucia stared at the photos, at the innocent faces looking back at her, and felt something crack inside her chest. She thought about her own childhood, about her father's warnings to stay away from men like this, about the fear she'd seen in his eyes whenever someone mentioned the old neighborhood, the old ways. These children deserved better than to inherit their father's sins. "Okay," she said softly. "I'll help, but I have conditions." Adrian raised an eyebrow. "You're in no position to negotiate. Neither are you, apparently, since you specifically requested me." Lucia closed the folder, her hand steadier now. "I want transparency. No lies, no half-truths. If you're asking me to translate something, I need to know the full context. I won't be a blind accomplice." "Agreed. And when this is over, when whatever agreement you've made is fulfilled, I walk away. No connections, no favors owed. Nothing that ties me to you or your world." Adrian was quiet for a long moment, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Then he extended his hand across the table. "You have my word." Lucia hesitated, knowing that shaking his hand meant crossing a line she couldn't uncross. But she thought about those children's faces, about the chance to do something that actually mattered, about the strange pull she felt toward this dangerous man who quoted his grandmother and fought for people who couldn't fight for themselves. She took his hand. His grip was firm, warm, and when he didn't immediately let go, she felt her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "Welcome to the other side of the law, Princess," Adrian said, his voice low and rough. "Try not to get too comfortable." Over the following weeks, Lucia fell into a rhythm that felt both surreal and strangely natural. She arrived at the office each morning, spent hours translating documents and recordings, broke for lunch that Adrian always ordered from expensive restaurants, then worked into the evening, her voice hoarse from speaking 2 languages simultaneously. They developed a shorthand, an understanding of each other's rhythms and thought processes. He learned that she preferred her coffee black with 2 sugars, that she twisted her hair when she was concentrating, that she had a sharp sense of humor that emerged when she was tired. She learned that he was more educated than she'd assumed, quoting philosophers and poets between legal strategies, that he had a younger sister he never mentioned in official documents, that the text tattooed on his neck was from Dante's Inferno. "Lasciate ogni speranza, voi c'entrate. Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." "Cheerful choice," Lucia remarked one evening, after working up the courage to ask about it. Adrian touched his neck absently. "A reminder of what I am, what I've done. Some things you can't wash away, Miss Romano. You can only carry them." It was the most honest thing he'd said to her, and it made her see him differently, not as a villain or a hero, but as something more complicated, more human. a man trying to atone without believing in redemption. But as the weeks passed and the documents piled up and the list of people they were trying to protect grew longer, Lucia began to notice inconsistencies. Meetings that Adrian attended but didn't mention. Phone calls he took in Italian, switching to dialect when he didn't want her to understand fully. Small lies by omission that added up to something bigger. And she realized, with growing dread, that the judicial agreement might be real, but it wasn't the whole story. Adrian Costa was playing a longer game, one that she was now part of whether she wanted to be or not. The turning point came on a Tuesday evening when Lucia stayed late to finish translating a particularly complex deposition. The office building was nearly empty, just a few cleaning staff and the ever-present security detail that shadowed Adrian's movements. She'd grown used to them, silent men in dark suits who treated her with careful respect, as if she were something fragile that might break or something dangerous that might bite. Lucia was deep into a section about financial transfers when she noticed something odd. The transcript she was working from referenced a meeting that had allegedly taken place in a warehouse in Brooklyn, but the address matched a location that had appeared in another document, one Adrian had specifically told her was unrelated to the federal case. She cross-referenced dates and realized they overlapped. Someone was lying, either the witness giving the deposition or Adrian himself when he'd explained the other document. She sat back, her mind racing. If Adrian had lied about this, what else had he lied about? Was the entire judicial agreement a facade, like the rumors suggested? Was she helping to orchestrate some elaborate deception that would ultimately hurt the very people they claimed to be protecting? "You look troubled." Adrian's voice startled her. She hadn't heard him approach, hadn't noticed him standing in the doorway watching her. He'd loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, and she could see more of the tattoos that decorated his forearms. Intricate designs that looked like they told stories, though she'd never asked what they meant. "Just tired," Lucia lied, closing her laptop a bit too quickly. Adrian walked into the room, moving with that predatory grace that never quite left him, even in casual moments. "You're a terrible liar, Miss Romano. One of your more endearing qualities, actually." He glanced at her closed laptop. "What did you find?" Her heart hammered. She could pretend ignorance, but he'd see through it. She could deflect, but that was just another form of lying. Or she could confront him directly and deal with the consequences. Lucia thought about her father's warnings, about the smart thing to do, about self-preservation. Then she thought about those children's faces in the photographs, about the promise of transparency, about the fact that she'd already crossed so many lines that one more barely mattered. "The warehouse meeting," she said quietly. "In the Brooklyn deposition. The address matches another location from the Castellano documents. You told me those were separate operations, but the dates overlap. Someone's lying." Adrian's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Respect, maybe, or resignation. He pulled out the chair next to her and sat down, close enough that she could smell his cologne, see the faint scar above his left eyebrow. "You're right. I did lie. Not about the documents themselves, but about their connection." Lucia's stomach dropped. "So this entire agreement is real," Adrian interrupted firmly. "Every word of it is real. The protection for those kids, the immunity I'm receiving, the information I'm providing to the prosecutors, all of it is legitimate. But yes, there's more to it. There's always more to it." He stood and walked to the window, his shoulders tense. For a long moment, he just stared out at the city lights, at the empire of concrete and steel that he'd helped shape through means both legal and otherwise. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, more careful, as if each word cost him something. "The federal agreement protects certain people, but it doesn't protect everyone. There are others, men, women, even teenagers, who are too deep in the organization to qualify for witness protection, too useful to let go, too dangerous to leave behind." The government wants to dismantle my operation, but they don't care what happens to the people at the bottom when the structure collapses. They'll either be killed by rivals moving into the power vacuum or arrested by the same prosecutors I'm working with. Lucia felt cold despite the warm office. So what are you doing? Creating a second exit, Adrian said simply. Using the chaos of the federal investigation as cover to move people out, to set up alternative identities and financial safety nets that aren't part of the official agreement. The warehouse meetings? Those are coordination points. The financial transfers? Those are funding these off-book relocations. He turned to face her, his expression serious. And yes, I lied to you about it because the fewer people who know, the safer everyone is, including you. I'm already not safe, Lucia said, her voice sharp. The moment I started working for you, I became complicit. You don't get to protect me by keeping me ignorant. That's not how this works. Then how does it work? Adrian challenged, taking a step toward her. You want full transparency? Fine. Let me paint you the complete picture. Right now, there are 3 families in this city who want me dead. 2 federal agencies investigating not just my organization, but everyone connected to it. And a prosecutor who will happily destroy anyone she perceives as an obstacle to her political ambitions, including a court interpreter, who suddenly has private access to the biggest organized crime case in a decade. He was close now, close enough that Lucia had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact, close enough that she could see the barely contained intensity in his expression. I'm not trying to control you by lying, Miss Romano. I'm trying to keep you alive long enough to see this through. Because whether you believe it or not, you matter to me. The confession hung between them, unexpected and heavy. Lucia's breath caught. She wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to dissect those 5 words, you matter to me, and understand if they were manipulation or truth, strategy or vulnerability. But before she could speak, the lights went out. The sudden darkness was absolute, the kind of pitch black that only happens when power is deliberately cut rather than accidentally lost. Adrian's hand found her arm immediately, his grip tight, but not painful. Stay close to me, he said, his voice calm despite the circumstances. Don't make a sound. Lucia's training kicked in. She'd grown up in neighborhoods where you learned early to recognize danger, to know the difference between routine trouble and the kind that could kill you. This was the latter. She let Adrian guide her away from the window, her hand finding his arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. Through the darkness, she heard sounds, footsteps in the hallway, multiple pairs, moving with purpose. Then voices, muffled but aggressive, speaking in Italian. They weren't security. They weren't police. Adrian pulled her down behind the conference table, just as the door exploded inward. Muzzle flashes lit the room in strobe-like bursts, bullets tearing through furniture and walls. Lucia pressed her face against Adrian's chest, feeling his heart beat steady and strong despite the chaos, smelling gunpowder and fear and the expensive cologne he wore. His arm wrapped around her, shielding her body with his own, and she realized with strange clarity that he would die to protect her, that this dangerous man who'd lied and manipulated and killed had somehow decided she was worth saving. The shooting stopped as abruptly as it began. Shouting in the hallway, Adrian's security detail finally responding. Return fire. The sounds of a struggle, bodies hitting walls, someone screaming in pain. Adrian shifted, reaching for something at his ankle. A gun, Lucia realized, though she'd never seen him carry one. His hand remained steady as he aimed toward the shattered doorway, waiting, ready. Then silence. Footsteps approaching again, but slower this time, cautious. Boss, a familiar voice. Marcus, Adrian's head of security. We got 3 of them. 1 escaped. Building secure. Adrian didn't lower his weapon. Check every room, every floor. I want cameras reviewed and perimeter doubled. No one else gets in. He finally looked down at Lucia, his expression unreadable in the darkness. Are you hurt?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. Now that the immediate danger had passed, she was shaking, adrenaline flooding her system. Adrian's hand found hers, his thumb brushing across her knuckles, in a gesture that was surprisingly gentle. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I'm so sorry you had to experience that." The lights flickered back on, revealing the destruction. Bullet holes in walls, shattered glass, overturned furniture. But what struck Lucia most was Adrian's face in the sudden brightness. He looked tired, older than his years, carrying weight that had nothing to do with physical burden. And he looked scared, not for himself, but for her, his eyes scanning her face and body for any sign of injury. Marcus appeared in the doorway with 2 other security guards, all of them armed and grim-faced. "The one who escaped headed for the parking garage. We've got footage of him getting into a black SUV with no plates. Sending the video to our contacts now for identification." "It was the Moretti family," Adrian said. Not a question, but a statement. He helped Lucia to her feet, his hand lingering on her back. "They found out about the federal agreement faster than I expected." This was a message. "What kind of message?" Lucia asked, her voice stronger now despite her shaking hands. Adrian's jaw tightened. "The kind that says if I'm going to burn, I'm taking everyone with me. They're declaring war." Over the next hour, Lucia watched Adrian transform from the composed businessman she'd been working with into something else entirely. The man beneath the suit, the leader who'd earned his reputation through blood and strategy rather than inherited privilege. He made calls, issued orders, coordinated responses with a calm efficiency that was almost frightening. This was what real power looked like, she realized. Not the theatrical violence of movies, but the ability to mobilize an army with a few words, to shift entire operations with a single decision. But what surprised her most was that he never sent her away. Even when his associates arrived for emergency meetings, even when they discussed things that were clearly illegal and dangerous, Adrian kept her close, his hand occasionally finding her shoulder or elbow, as if reassuring himself that she was real and safe. And his men, these hardened criminals who probably had decades of violence between them, treated her with careful respect, nodding when she entered the room, stepping aside to let her pass, as if Adrian had somehow claimed her as something precious. They left the building at 3 a.m, surrounded by security that had tripled in size. Adrian insisted on driving her home himself, dismissing protests from Marcus about protocol and safety. The city streets were empty, illuminated by streetlights that cast everything in amber and shadow. Lucia sat in the passenger seat of Adrian's car, a sleek black sedan that probably cost more than most people made in a year, and tried to process everything that had happened, everything she'd learned, everything she now understood about the life she'd stumbled into. "I'll have a security detail assigned to you," Adrian said, breaking the silence. "They'll be discreet, but they'll be close. If anyone approaches you, if anything feels wrong, you call me immediately. Not 911, not the office. Me." He handed her a phone, a burner, she realized, the kind that couldn't be traced. "My number is already programmed in. It's the only number in there." Lucia took the phone, feeling its weight in her palm. "This wasn't supposed to be dangerous. You told me I'd just be translating documents." "I know. I miscalculated." Adrian's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "The families move faster than they used to. They're more desperate, more willing to break the old rules. I thought I had more time before things escalated." "More time to do what?" Lucia turned to face him. "What's the endgame here, Adrian? You get everyone out, make your deals with the prosecutors, and then what? You ride off into the sunset with your immunity and your clean conscience." He laughed, but it was a bitter sound, empty of humor. "There is no clean conscience for men like me, Miss Romano. There's only degrees of stained. But yes, the plan is to get everyone out who deserves a chance. Burn down the organization from the inside so it can't be rebuilt, and then disappear. New name, new country, new life. Assuming I survive long enough to see it through. And me? The question escaped before Lucia could stop it. What happens to me when this is over? Adrian pulled up in front of her apartment building and put the car in park. He turned to face her, and in the dim light from the dashboard, his expression was raw, unguarded in a way she'd never seen. That depends on what you want. If you want to walk away, I'll make sure you have everything you need. Money, protection, a clean break from all of this. No one will know you were involved. You'll be safe. And if I don't want to walk away? The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither of them had acknowledged until now. Adrian reached out slowly, giving her time to pull back, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His touch was gentle, reverent, completely at odds with the violence they'd survived hours earlier. Then I'd be the selfish bastard you called me in that courtroom because I'd want you with me. I'd want to know that when I disappear, I'm not disappearing alone. That somewhere in whatever new life I manage to build, there's someone who sees me. The real me. Not the legend or the monster, but the man in between. Lucia's breath caught. She should be terrified by this confession, by the intensity in his voice, by the implication that he was offering her a future that made no logical sense. But all she felt was a pull, that same magnetic attraction that had been building since the first day, since he'd smiled at her insult and decided she was worth pursuing. "I'm not what you think I am," she said softly. "I'm not brave or special. I'm just a girl from Brooklyn who speaks a few languages and was stupid enough to insult a dangerous man." "You're wrong about all of that," Adrian said. "You're the bravest person I've ever met. You sat in a room with killers and told me I was lying to my face. You stayed during a shootout when most people would have panicked. You see through the performance everyone else believes. That's not stupidity, that's courage." He paused, his thumb tracing her jawline. "And you're more special than you could possibly understand." Before Lucia could respond, before she could analyze or rationalize or pull away, Adrian kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate and hungry, and filled with all the tension that had been building between them for weeks. His hand cupped the back of her neck, holding her close, and Lucia found herself kissing him back with equal intensity, her fingers tangling in his perfectly styled hair, ruining it, making him real and touchable and human. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. "This is a terrible idea," he murmured. "I'm going to get you killed or ruin your life or both." "Probably," Lucia agreed, her voice shaky. "But I think I stopped caring about good ideas around the same time I took this job." They sat like that for a long moment, suspended in the space between what they'd been and what they were becoming. Then Lucia's phone rang, her real phone, not the burner. She pulled it out and saw her father's name on the screen, felt reality crash back in. "I have to go," she said, opening the car door. "My father, he worries when I'm out late." "Lucia." Adrian caught her hand before she could leave. "I meant what I said. If you want out, I'll understand. You don't owe me anything." She looked back at him, at this complex man who killed without hesitation, but fought to save children he'd never met, who built an empire on fear but quoted poetry in quiet moments, who wore violence like armor, but touched her like she was something precious. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "Not until this is finished. We protect those people. We see it through. And then—" She trailed off, not quite ready to finish that thought. "And then we see what comes next," Adrian completed, understanding. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Get some sleep. I'll have security positioned by dawn. And Lucia, thank you for staying, for not running when you had every reason to." Lucia climbed the stairs to her apartment in a daze, her lips still tingling from his kiss, her mind spinning with everything that had happened. She found her father asleep in his chair by the window, a book open on his lap, waiting up for her like he used to when she was a teenager. The sight made her chest tight with guilt and love and fear for what might happen if he ever learned the truth about what she was doing, who she was working for. She covered him with a blanket and went to her bedroom, finally allowing herself to collapse. As she lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Sleep well, princess. Tomorrow we finish what we started. Adrian, of course." She smiled despite everything, despite the danger and the insanity and the absolute certainty that she was making the biggest mistake of her life. But it didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like falling, like jumping off a cliff with no idea if there would be water or rocks at the bottom, only knowing that the fall itself was exhilarating and terrifying and utterly inevitable. The next morning, Lucia woke to find 3 missed calls from Adrian and a text that made her heart stop. They took Sophia. Moving timeline up. Need you at the safe house immediately. Address attached. Sophia, Adrian's sister, the one he never mentioned in official documents, the one Lucia had only learned about through careful observation and overheard conversations. She grabbed her things and rushed out, ignoring her father's concerned questions, nearly colliding with the security detail that had apparently been stationed outside her building since before dawn. They drove her to an address in Queens, to a residential neighborhood that looked completely ordinary, completely safe, completely wrong for the emergency unfolding. Inside the safe house, chaos. Adrian stood at the center of it, phone pressed to his ear, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. Marcus and 4 other men surrounded a table covered with maps, phones, and weapons. When Adrian saw Lucia, relief flashed across his face before being swallowed by urgency. He ended his call and crossed to her in 3 strides, his hands framing her face as he checked her over for injuries that didn't exist. "Tell me what happened," Lucia demanded. "The Morettis took Sophia from her apartment last night. They left a message saying they'll trade her for the list of names. Everyone I'm relocating through the unofficial channels. If I give them up, they'll kill them all to send a message. If I don't, they'll kill Sophia." His voice cracked on his sister's name. "I can't lose her. She's the only family I have left. But I can't sacrifice dozens of innocent people either." Lucia's mind raced. "Then we don't trade. We get her back." "That's not how this works," Marcus interjected. "The Morettis have her in their stronghold in Red Hook. It's a fortress. We'd need an army to breach it, and by the time we mobilized—" "We don't need an army," Lucia interrupted, an idea forming. "We need a distraction, and someone they won't suspect, someone who can walk in the front door." Adrian's eyes widened as he understood. "Absolutely not. I won't risk you." "You don't have a choice," Lucia said firmly. "I'm a court interpreter. I can claim I'm there to translate for a federal investigation, that I have questions about documents they're involved in. They won't hurt me because I'm too visible, too connected to official channels. It would bring too much heat." "Unless they realize you're working for me," Adrian argued, "then you're not a court official. You're an enemy combatant." "Then we make sure they don't realize it, until it's too late." Lucia turned to Marcus. "You said the message was delivered last night. How?" "Courier. Young kid, probably didn't even know what he was carrying. So they're using intermediaries, staying cautious. That means they're worried about surveillance, about leaving trails." Lucia's confidence grew as the plan took shape. "If I show up asking about financial records, claiming it's part of the federal case against Adrian's organization, they'll think I'm trying to build evidence against him. They might even see me as useful, a federal employee they can manipulate or bribe." Adrian shook his head, but she could see him considering it, see the strategic part of his brain analyzing the angles. "Even if you get inside, you don't know where they're keeping Sophia. The building has 3 floors and a basement. Then you'll tell me where to look based on their standard operating procedures. You know how they think, how they secure assets." Lucia stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Adrian, you taught me that sometimes the best weapon is the one your enemy never sees coming. Let me be that weapon." The room fell silent as everyone waited for his decision. Lucia watched emotions war across his face: fear, admiration, frustration, and something deeper. Something that looked like love but couldn't possibly be. Not this soon. Not with so little reason. Finally, he exhaled and nodded. "We do this my way. Full surveillance, immediate extraction the moment you locate Sophia, and at the first sign that you're compromised, you run. You don't try to be a hero. You don't take risks. You run, and we burn the whole operation down to get you out." "Agreed," Lucia said. What followed was 2 hours of preparation that felt like a crash course in espionage. They outfitted her with a hidden microphone, ran through dozens of potential scenarios, taught her recognition signals and extraction protocols. Adrian personally checked every piece of equipment, his hands efficient but lingering whenever they touched her skin. When it was finally time to go, he pulled her aside, away from the others. "I need you to understand something," he said quietly. "If this goes wrong, if they hurt you because of me, I will burn that building to the ground with everyone inside. I will violate every principle I've ever held, break every deal I've made, destroy everything I've built. Because losing you—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "I can't lose you." Lucia reached up and kissed him, pouring everything she couldn't say into the touch. Trust and fear, and that dangerous feeling growing in her chest that might be love, or might be madness. "Then make sure the plan works," she whispered against his lips. "Because I'm not done with you yet." The Moretti stronghold looked exactly like what it was. A front business hiding something far more dangerous. From the outside, it appeared to be a legitimate shipping company, with trucks coming and going, workers in uniforms loading and unloading cargo. But Lucia could see the tells. The men who stood too still, too alert, the cameras positioned at angles that had nothing to do with theft prevention, the reinforced doors that looked decorative, but were clearly designed to withstand force. She walked through the front entrance with her interpreter credentials clearly displayed, her stride confident despite the fear churning in her stomach. The receptionist looked up with practiced disinterest, then frowned when she saw the official identification. "Can I help you?" "I'm here regarding the federal investigation into organized crime activities in this district," Lucia said, using her most professional tone. "I need to speak with whoever manages your financial records. There are some documents that require translation and verification." The receptionist's expression shifted from disinterest to wariness. "I'm sorry, but without an appointment." "This is official federal business," Lucia interrupted, letting a hint of impatience color her voice. "I can come back with federal agents and subpoenas, or you can cooperate now and avoid making this more complicated than it needs to be. Your choice." The woman hesitated, then picked up a phone, speaking in rapid Italian too quiet for Lucia to fully hear. She hung up and gestured toward a hallway. "Second floor. Mr. Moretti will see you." As Lucia climbed the stairs, she touched the hidden microphone beneath her blouse, a reminder that Adrian and his team were listening to every word, monitoring every moment. The building's layout matched what they'd discussed: offices on the first 2 floors, residential spaces on the 3rd, basement for storage and more sensitive operations. Sophia would most likely be in the basement, secured and hidden, but Lucia needed confirmation. Dominic Moretti was exactly what she'd expected. Mid-50s, expensive suit, eyes that calculated threats before bothering with pleasantries. He sat behind a massive desk in an office that screamed old money power, surrounded by men whose suits didn't quite hide the weapons they carried. When Lucia entered, he didn't stand, didn't offer his hand, just studied her with the kind of assessment that made her skin crawl. "Miss Romano," he said, her name sliding off his tongue like an accusation. the court interpreter who's been spending so much time with Adrian Costa. Tell me, what brings you to my legitimate place of business with federal credentials and accusations? Lucia's heart hammered, but she kept her expression neutral. I'm here in my official capacity as a translator for the federal investigation. Your organization has been mentioned in several documents that require cultural context and linguistic verification. I'm simply following procedure. Following procedure. Dominic smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Or gathering information for your employer. And I'm not referring to the federal government. This was the moment. Lucia could run, could try to extract herself before the situation deteriorated. Or she could commit fully to the performance, trust Adrian's plan, and push forward. She thought about Sophia, about those children in the photographs, about Adrian's face when he'd said he couldn't lose her. Then she made her choice. I don't work for Adrian Costa, she said, letting genuine frustration enter her voice. In fact, I'm here because I'm trying to build a case against him. The federal agreement he's negotiated? It's too lenient. He's playing the prosecutors, giving them just enough to satisfy their quotas while protecting the worst offenders in his organization. I need evidence to prove that, and your records could provide it. The lie was beautiful in its simplicity because it contained just enough truth to be believable. Dominic leaned back, reassessing her. Why would you tell me this? Why not just demand the records officially? Because official requests leave paper trails, and I suspect Costa has people inside the federal system watching for exactly that. But if I come here privately, as a concerned employee who's troubled by what she's seeing, asking for your help in exposing him, Lucia trailed off meaningfully. Well, that's different. Dominic was silent for a long moment. Then he laughed, genuine amusement lighting his face. You're either incredibly clever or incredibly stupid. I haven't decided which yet. He stood, walking to a cabinet and pouring 2 glasses of whiskey. Let's say I believe you. What exactly are you looking for? Financial transfers that connect to his offshore accounts. Specifically, payments made to shell companies in the last 6 months. If I can prove he's been siphoning money meant for witness relocation, I can get the agreement voided and have him charged with fraud on top of everything else. It was a perfect hook, specific enough to sound legitimate, valuable enough to be worth Dominic's time, and completely unverifiable without access to records he probably didn't have. Which meant he'd have to decide whether she was useful or dangerous, whether to help her or eliminate her. Those records are in our secure storage, Dominic said slowly. Basement level. But I'm curious, Miss Romano. If you're really trying to take down Costa, why come to me? Why not approach the federal prosecutors directly? Because they're political creatures, Lucia said, accepting the whiskey he offered, even though she had no intention of drinking it. They want headlines and convictions, not justice. If I give them evidence that Costa is manipulating them, they'll bury it to avoid embarrassment. But if I can build an independent case, something airtight that they can't ignore. She let the implication hang. Dominic studied her over his glass. You're playing a dangerous game. Costa finds out you're working against him. He'll kill you. Slowly. Creatively. He has a reputation for dealing with betrayal. Then I guess I'd better make sure he doesn't find out, Lucia said, meeting his gaze steadily. Another long moment of assessment. Then Dominic nodded. Marco, take Miss Romano to the basement archive. Show her the financial records from the offshore accounts. Let's see if she's as clever as she thinks she is. Lucia followed Marco, a thick-necked enforcer who looked like he ate bullets for breakfast, down 2 flights of stairs to the basement. The temperature dropped as they descended, and she could hear the hum of ventilation systems, smell the mustiness of concrete and old paper. The basement was a maze of storage rooms and corridors, but Marco led her confidently to a locked door at the end of a hallway. He unlocked it and gestured inside. Records are on the left, You've got 20 minutes before Mr. Moretti wants you back upstairs." As soon as the door closed behind her, Lucia exhaled shakily and spoke quietly toward her microphone. "I'm in the basement. Archive room at the east end. No sign of Sophia yet." Adrian's voice crackled in her nearly invisible earpiece, so quiet she had to strain to hear. "North corridor, third door. We're seeing heat signatures on the thermal scan. One person secured. Marcus and the team are breaching the perimeter now. 2 minutes." Lucia's hands trembled as she pretended to search through files, giving herself a reason to move around the room. She spotted the corridor Adrian mentioned through a small window in the door. Narrow, dimly lit, with multiple doors that all looked identical. She needed to reach that third door, but Marco was right outside, and there was no way she could just walk out without raising suspicion. Then the lights went out, not just in her room, but throughout the entire basement. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, bathing everything in red. Lucia heard Marco curse outside her door, heard running footsteps and shouting in Italian. Adrian's team had breached, was creating the distraction they'd planned. This was her chance. She opened the door slowly and found the hallway empty. Marco had run toward the commotion. Lucia moved quickly toward the north corridor, trying to walk with purpose rather than panic, trying to look like she belonged here even though her heart was racing and every instinct screamed at her to run. She counted doors, 1, 2, 3, and found the last one secured with a heavy padlock. She had no way to open it, no tools, no plan beyond getting here. "I'm at the door," she whispered. "I can't get in." "Move away from it," Adrian's voice commanded. "Now." Lucia stepped back just as the door exploded inward, not from inside, but from precise charges that Marcus must have planted. Through the smoke and debris, she saw Sophia, younger than she'd imagined, maybe 22, with Adrian's dark eyes and their family's stubborn jaw. She was bound to a chair, tape over her mouth, but alive and seemingly unharmed. Lucia rushed in and began working on the ropes binding Sophia's wrists. "I'm here to help," she said quickly, as Sophia's eyes widened in fear. "Your brother sent me. We're getting you out." Sophia made muffled sounds behind the tape, gesturing frantically with her head toward the doorway. Lucia turned and found Marco standing there, gun raised, his expression no longer neutral but murderous. "You lying bitch," he snarled. "You're with Costa. Lower the weapon." Adrian's voice, deadly calm, came from behind Marco. Lucia watched as Marco slowly turned and found himself facing Adrian, Marcus, and 3 other armed men. "Lower it, or what happens next will be very permanent." Marco's gun wavered, then dropped. "You can't get out. The building's surrounded by our people. Dominic's already calling in reinforcements." "Then I suggest we all move quickly," Adrian said. His eyes found Lucia's across the room, and she saw relief and fury and fear all mixed together in his expression. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine. But Sophia needs medical attention. She's been here at least 12 hours. Adrian moved past Marco as if he were furniture, kneeling beside his sister and carefully removing the tape from her mouth. Sophia immediately threw her arms around his neck, sobbing. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. They came for me because of you, because of what you're doing." "Shh, not your fault. Never your fault." Adrian held her close for just a moment. Then his professional mask snapped back into place. "Can you walk?" Sophia nodded, and Lucia helped her stand. They moved as a unit back toward the basement entrance, Adrian leading, Marcus bringing up the rear. Gunfire erupted somewhere above them, Dominic's reinforcements arriving, Adrian's team holding them back. The plan had been for a quick extraction, in and out, before anyone could mobilize a serious response. But they'd been delayed, and now they were trapped in a war zone. "Service tunnel. Marcus said urgently. Northeast corner. We can get to the parking garage that way. They changed direction, running now through the maze of corridors. Lucia kept one hand on Sophia, steadying her, while her other hand found Adrian's. He squeezed it once, hard enough to hurt, as if grounding himself with the confirmation that she was real, was here, was alive. The service tunnel was exactly as bad as it sounded. Narrow, low-ceilinged, smelling of decay and rust. They had to move single file, Marcus in front now with a flashlight, Adrian behind Lucia and Sophia, protecting them from any pursuit. Above them, the sounds of the battle continued, muffled by concrete but still audible. Shouts, gunfire, sirens in the distance. The authorities would arrive soon, drawn by the violence, and everyone involved would scatter. This was the chaos Adrian had orchestrated, the collapse of the old structure that would let him rebuild something new in its place. They emerged in the parking garage 3 blocks away, where more of Adrian's men waited with vehicles. Sophia was bundled into an SUV that would take her directly to a private doctor, surrounded by enough security to repel a small army. Before the door closed, she grabbed Lucia's hand. "Thank you," she said, her voice hoarse from disuse and tears, "for coming for me, for risking yourself." "Your brother would have burned the world down to get you back," Lucia said simply. "I just helped him be strategic about it." Sophia smiled, fragile but real, then looked at Adrian. "She's the one, isn't she? The one you told me about on the phone last week, the one who makes you think you could have a different life." Adrian's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. "Get her to safety," he told the driver. "I'll be right behind you." The aftermath was controlled chaos. Adrian's organization scattered to pre-arranged locations, following protocols established specifically for this scenario. The Moretti stronghold burned, literally burned, because someone had started a fire during the fighting that quickly spread through the upper floors. Fire trucks and police cars swarmed the area, and Lucia watched from the passenger seat of Adrian's car as the building she'd walked into an hour ago was consumed by flames and sirens and the machinery of official response. "They'll blame the Morettis for the fire," Adrian said, navigating through side streets with practiced ease. "Arson. Improper storage of flammable materials. Pick your violation. The federal investigation will use this as leverage to accelerate their case. And by the time anyone thinks to look for the people who were actually responsible, we'll be ghosts." "We?" Lucia repeated quietly. Adrian's hand found hers on the center console. "You're in this now. All the way in. The moment you walked into that building for Sophia, you became part of my world. The Morettis know your face, know you're working with me. You can't go back to your old life. It's not safe. So yes, we. You and me and everyone I'm trying to save. We disappear together. Or we don't disappear at all." Lucia should have been terrified. She should have been protesting, demanding to be let out, insisting there had to be another way. But all she felt was a strange sense of inevitability, as if every choice she'd made since that first day in the courtroom had been leading to this moment, this man, this impossible future. "My father," she said. "I can't just leave him without explanation." "We'll bring him," Adrian said immediately. "If he wants to come, we'll set him up wherever we end up, give him a cover story, keep him safe. I'm not asking you to abandon your family, Lucia. I'm asking you to trust me to protect them." They drove to a safe house in Connecticut, a sprawling estate hidden behind gates and trees that looked like it belonged to old money and legitimate power. Inside, it was chaos of a different kind. People Lucia recognized from the documents she'd translated, the children and mothers whose photographs she'd seen, all of them in various states of preparation for departure. Some were packing bags, others receiving new identification documents. Some just sitting in shock as they processed the sudden upheaval of their entire existence. Adrian moved among them with surprising gentleness, checking on individuals, answering questions, providing reassurance. Lucia watched him, and saw clearly what she'd suspected for weeks. This wasn't about power or control, or even survival. This was about redemption. About using the skills and resources he'd acquired through violence to save people from the same system that had created him. He would never be a good man. Too much blood on his hands for that. But he was trying to be a better one, and that counted for something. "You love him." The statement came from behind her. Lucia turned to find an older woman, maybe 60, with tired eyes and gentle hands. "I can see it. The way you watch him. The way your whole body relaxes when he's near. That's love, or the beginning of it." "I barely know him," Lucia protested weakly. "Sometimes knowing happens fast, especially in extreme circumstances. My husband and I met during a hurricane, trapped in the same shelter for 3 days. We were married a month later, stayed together 40 years until he passed." The woman smiled sadly. "Adrian saved my grandson. The boy's father made some very bad choices, got involved with people who used children as leverage. Adrian got my grandson out, gave us new names, new lives. He didn't have to do that. It didn't benefit him strategically. He did it because it was right. He's also a murderer," Lucia said, needing to voice the truth even if it hurt. "He's done terrible things." "Yes," the woman agreed simply. "But terrible people don't usually try to save others at risk to themselves. Terrible people don't look at a court interpreter the way he looks at you, like you're something precious and fragile that might break if he holds on too tight." She patted Lucia's arm. "Whatever you decide, do it with your eyes open. But don't let fear of his past destroy the possibility of his future. Some men deserve second chances, even if they don't believe it themselves." Over the next week, Lucia existed in a strange limbo between her old life and whatever came next. She spent mornings working with Adrian on the final phases of the federal agreement, afternoons helping coordinate relocations, evenings having quiet conversations with her father about possibilities she couldn't fully explain. Her father, perceptive as always, understood more than she said. "This man you're working for," he said one night over dinner. "He's the kind my father warned me about. The kind who brings danger, but also protection. The kind who can destroy you or save you, depending on the day." "I know," Lucia admitted. "But Papa, he's trying to change. He's trying to be better." Her father studied her for a long moment. "And you? What are you trying to be?" The question haunted her. What was she trying to be? A good person doing bad things for good reasons? A naive girl who'd fallen for a dangerous man? A woman brave enough to choose her own path regardless of where it led? She didn't have an answer, but she knew that she wasn't the same person who'd walked into that courtroom weeks ago. That Lucia had been safe, cautious, living a carefully controlled life. This Lucia had seen violence and chosen to step toward it anyway, had looked at a man built from darkness and seen light struggling to break through. The federal prosecutors finally closed their case on a rainy Tuesday morning. Adrian testified for 6 hours, providing names, dates, financial records, and testimony that would dismantle 3 crime families and lead to dozens of indictments. Lucia translated every word, watching as he calmly destroyed the infrastructure he'd helped build, burning bridges he'd never be able to cross again. When it was over, when he walked out of that building for the last time, he looked exhausted, but somehow lighter, as if he'd been carrying weight for years and had finally set it down. "It's done," he told her in the car. "The agreement is fulfilled. Everyone who wanted out is out. Everyone who deserves protection has it. The organization is finished." "And us?" Lucia asked. "What happens to us?" Adrian pulled over on a quiet street and turned to face her fully. "I have a plane leaving tomorrow night. Private charter to Portugal, then transport to a property I own under a different name. It's remote, secure, completely off the grid. I'll spend the next year rebuilding myself into someone new. New identity, new business ventures, all legitimate this time. After that, he took her hand. After that, I don't know. I've never planned past survival before. Take me with you, Lucia said, the words emerging with certainty that surprised her. And my father, if he'll come. I don't want to go back to courtrooms and translation booths and pretending I haven't seen what I've seen, haven't felt what I feel. I want to see what comes next. You'd give up everything? Adrian's voice was rough with emotion. Your career, your friends, your entire life? I'm not giving it up. I'm trading it for something different. Maybe something better. Lucia leaned closer, her forehead resting against his. You asked me once what I wanted. This is what I want. You. This insane future. The chance to be someone I haven't figured out yet. Adrian kissed her then, deep and desperate, his hands framing her face like she was something infinitely precious. When they finally broke apart, he was smiling. Really smiling. Not the careful, calculated expression he wore for business, but something genuine and vulnerable. Then pack light, princess. We've got a world to disappear into. The next 36 hours passed in a blur of preparation. Lucia's father, after an hour-long conversation with Adrian that she wasn't permitted to attend, agreed to come, his only condition being that he could bring his most valuable possession, a sewing machine that had belonged to his own father. They packed essentials, destroyed anything that could be traced, said silent goodbyes to lives they'd never return to. Lucia left a letter for her supervisor claiming a family emergency abroad, vague enough to be believable, specific enough to avoid immediate suspicion. At the airport, surrounded by security until the last possible moment, Lucia looked back at the city lights one final time. New York had been her whole world, and now she was leaving it behind for something unknown. But when she felt Adrian's hand slip into hers, felt the solid weight of her father's presence on her other side, she understood that home wasn't a place. It was people, was choice, was courage enough to step into uncertainty. The plane was small and luxurious, clearly designed for privacy rather than passenger capacity. As they lifted off into the night sky, Lucia watched through the window as New York shrank beneath them, becoming just another constellation of lights in the darkness. Adrian sat beside her, his fingers interlaced with hers, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked peaceful. Tell me about Portugal, she said softly. About this new life you're building. It's a vineyard, actually, Adrian said, surprising her. In the Douro Valley, overlooking the river. The previous owner died with no heirs, and I bought it through enough shell companies that no one will ever connect it to me, or to the man I used to be. He paused, then added, I thought about what I wanted to do if I ever got out, what kind of life would make sense, and I kept coming back to the idea of growing things, nurturing something instead of destroying it. Wine seemed appropriate, taking something bitter and harsh, and transforming it into something people celebrate. Lucia smiled at the metaphor. That's surprisingly poetic for a former crime boss. I told you I was full of surprises, princess. Adrian lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. But here's the biggest one. I'm terrified. I've spent my entire adult life knowing exactly who I was and what I was capable of. Now I'm flying into complete unknown with a woman who insulted me in Sicilian and somehow became the most important person in my life. I have no idea what I'm doing. Good, Lucia said. Neither do I. We can figure it out together. Her father, sitting across from them with a blanket and a cup of tea, watched them with the knowing expression of someone who'd seen this story before, who understood that love didn't always follow logical paths. Your grandmother would have liked him, he said to Lucia in Sicilian, knowing Adrian would understand. She always said the best men were the ones who scared you a little but made you brave. Adrian responded in the same dialect, his accent perfect and natural. I promise to deserve her. Every day. For as long as she'll let me. 3 months later, Lucia stood in the vineyard at sunset, her hands stained purple from helping with the harvest, her body tired but satisfied. The house was everything Adrian had promised. Remote, beautiful, peaceful. They'd fallen into rhythms, learning each other in the quiet hours between work and rest. She was studying viticulture, finding unexpected joy in understanding the science of fermentation and the art of patience. Her father had opened a small tailoring shop in the nearby village, finding community among people who appreciated craftsmanship. And Adrian was transforming, shedding the armor of violence slowly but surely, becoming softer in his edges while maintaining the strength that had drawn her to him. He found her in the vineyard, as he often did at this hour, carrying 2 glasses of wine from last year's harvest. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, settling beside her on the stone wall that bordered the property. "About that day in the courtroom," Lucia admitted. "About how calling you a bastard in Sicilian changed my entire life. If I'd kept quiet, if you hadn't heard me, I would have found another way to meet you," Adrian said with certainty. "I knew from the first moment I saw you that you were going to matter. I just didn't know how much." He handed her a glass and raised his own. "To insults in dead languages and the idiots brave enough to fall for the people who hear them." Lucia laughed and clinked her glass against his. The wine was good, not perfect yet, but promising, like everything else in their new life. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, suddenly nervous. Adrian's expression shifted to concern. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I'm pregnant." The words hung in the evening air. Adrian went very still, his wineglass frozen halfway to his lips. Then he set it down carefully and turned to face her fully, his hands finding her waist, pulling her close. "Say that again," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm pregnant. About 8 weeks, according to the doctor in the village. I wasn't sure how to tell you. Wasn't sure if you wanted—" He kissed her, cutting off her uncertainty, his hands gentle on her face. When he pulled back, there were tears in his eyes. "I've done terrible things, Lucia. Things I can never take back. Sins I can never atone for. But this, getting to be a father, getting to raise a child with you in this place we've built, that's redemption I never thought I'd deserve." Lucia leaned into him, feeling safe and loved and hopeful for the first time in longer than she could remember. Around them, the vineyard stretched in neat rows, the grapes ripening in the last light of day, everything growing towards something sweeter. In the distance, she could see her father through the window of the main house, probably preparing dinner, probably already suspicious about why they'd been outside so long. Tomorrow she'd tell him he was going to be a grandfather. Tomorrow they'd start planning for the future that was suddenly more real, more tangible. But tonight, she sat with the man who'd started as an insult, overheard in a language of secrets, who'd become a partner in crime, and then something far more profound. She thought about the woman she'd been, careful, controlled, safe. And she looked at the woman she'd become, brave, complicated, free. The journey between them had been dangerous and impossible, and absolutely worth it. "You know," Adrian said, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach, "our child is going to grow up speaking 3 languages, English, Italian, and Sicilian for insults." "Obviously," Lucia agreed, smiling. "It's the only way to ensure they're properly prepared for life." He laughed, that genuine sound she'd learned to treasure, and pulled her closer. They sat like that as the sun finished setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, 2 people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and chosen to build something beautiful anyway. Behind them, the house waited with warm light and her father's cooking. Ahead of them, years stretched with infinite possibility, and between them, a tiny life beginning, proof that even from darkness and danger and terrible choices, something good could grow. In the morning, they'd wake early to tend the vines. They'd work side by side in the Portuguese sun, building calluses and strength and a legitimate life from soil and sweat and patience. But tonight was for celebration, for acknowledging that they'd survived everything meant to destroy them, and had emerged not unscathed, but unbroken. That they'd looked at impossible odds and chosen each other anyway. Lucia raised her glass one more time. To spoiled bastards who understand Sicilian, she toasted. Adrian clinked his glass against hers, his smile wide and free. And to brave princesses who aren't afraid to speak their minds, even when dangerous men are listening. They drank as the first stars appeared, as the world settled into evening quiet, as their future unfolded before them, like the rows of vines stretching toward the horizon, carefully tended, patiently nurtured, full of promise, and the possibility of something extraordinary.